turn it back over to you in a second. Is there any further discussion with the consent agenda? Seeing no takers, we will go to a vote on the consent agenda. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The consent agenda passes unanimously, and without objection, we are adjourned as a city council with mayor presiding at 7:21.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My apologies. We will now reconvene the regular city council meeting at 7:20, and it's a little early to go to the public forum. We can't do consent agenda, so Mr. Mayor, are you prepared to do the appointments now? Or would you prefer?
No, I'm happy to, just give me one second.
So item number 4.01 is a communication from the mayor regarding mayoral appointments. And
So point of order, can,
Councilor Mason, what's your point of order?
I'm not sure.
I think it's probably the same thing I'm actually wondering.
Given that it's on deliberative, should we not
City-
voting on anything until it maybe go to a presentation?
City Attorney Blackwood, should we wait on that until after the public forum?
You probably should, yes.
Okay, so let me move ahead to item 4.02, presentation. Brad Siegel, founder and president of Progressive Urban Management Associates, Puma, regarding Global Trends Report. Because there's nobody signed up.
Thank you, President Wright. Kelly Devine from the Burlington Business Association. The presentation is about 20 minutes long, so if it's the pleasure of the council, we can start that, interrupt it, and then
Well,
continue.
let's start it. It's still too early to start the public forum.
Okay. So my name is Kelly Devine. I'm the executive director of the Burlington Business Association. As councilors may know, we're operating in a partnership with the Department of Public Works, doing a series of parking improvements and also taking an in-depth look at the current state of our downtown improvement district, which involves Public Works because the funding is designated by charter to fund the 2-hour free parking program. And as part of the agreement that came before council last year, authority was given to create a downtown improvement district advisory committee. That group is actively operating. Councilor Roof is on it representing the council, and we have, through a competitive process, procured Brad Siegel and his firm Puma to do an investigation and come forward with some suggestions for next steps for the downtown improvement district. It's been a pleasure working with Brad. Some of you from the council may remember our trip to Denver in 2010. Brad at that time was with the Denver Partnership and ran that group in downtown Denver. He's since gone out on his own into the consulting world and has worked with a long series of cities to help them solve and address these types of questions and problems. Some of them include Boulder, Colorado. We visited there that they're actively working with. Santa Monica, California. Some of you may remember that their executive director came and met with some of us about a little over a year ago. Berkeley, California. Over 75 different cities that they've worked with. So let me introduce Brad Siegel, the principal of Puma.
Great, thank you. And are we struggling to find the presentation back there? All right. Anyway, Council, thank you for inviting me here tonight. I am going to talk about different trends that are shaping cities and how that's going to relate to our work in Burlington. A couple revisions real quickly to the bio too. I've been involved in downtown and community development work for about 30 years, and for 25 years we've been consulting around the country, working in a variety of cities. Our job in Burlington is to look at the improvement districts that we have. You're aware that Church Street and the Downtown Improvement District are both 30 and 20 years old, respectively. And it's a worthwhile exercise from time to time, or within 20 or 30 years, to take a look and see if we have the best tools for what's moving forward. It doesn't look like we have the trends presentation, so I don't know if you're back up to public comment period.
You're still working on the,
There we go.
there we go.
Bingo. All right, this is not a 20-minute presentation. We also have a 10-minute version for you because that's what's on the agenda tonight. So we're going to obey the agenda, walk you through this, and then would love to have comments and questions from council if we trigger it at the appropriate time. So thank you. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to talk about is a body of work that our firm manages about different trends that are shaping cities. And this body of work came from our work in our hometown in Denver. 10 years ago, we were the economists for a downtown plan looking at the next 20 years of our city. And to project ahead, we looked at 10 different trends that are shaping cities actually all over the country. Next slide, please. So this trends exercise, it not only informed our work in Denver, but we found that it also helped us in cities all over the country. And it has since become a bit of a cottage industry for us. So we publish these results, and we'll make that publication as well as these slides available to council and to anyone who's actually watching in the community tonight. This slide simply shows that these trends have changed over time. So the trends that we looked at 10 years ago are not necessarily the trends we look at today. Next slide, please. So what we're looking at, next slide, please, we start with demographics. And there are 4 generations that are really shaping cities and influencing how downtowns are growing. We all know about baby boomers. I am a boomer myself. It looks like I don't have many of you sharing that generational distinction. There are a couple of you. There are several of you. But boomers, we can all be honest in the room. Boomers, though, our sheer numbers really shaped the country, shaped our cities for many, many years, for decades, until the Great Recession. And then of all these generations shaping cities, we were hurt the hardest by this. So a lot of us not only lost home values, but we also lost retirement savings. Before that, as the picture on the slide, that's how it was going to end for us boomers. We were all going to be happy on a beach in love, somewhere, but not so much. And what's happening is we're aging in place, and that's an opportunity for Burlington. More and more boomers are staying in their cities. They're aging in place. They're predisposed to be in downtown markets. Next slide, please. Gen X are those who are 35 to 50. And what I do see among council is what I'm seeing increasingly in cities is that more and more Gen X people are in leadership positions, are really taking the reins in different cities, are the next generation to lead us forward. Most Gen X now have families, and this is where most of the disposable income is in the economy. So Gen X is increasingly important for downtown areas as well. Next slide, please. Millennials, I'm the father of 2 millennial kids. Some of you may have kids who are in that 20 to 35 age range. Every city in the United States right now, including Burlington, are competing for millennials. This is where the growth in the economy is. This is the raw material that's powering the growth segments in the economy. And we're lucky in Burlington because we have an endless engine of millennial talent coming out of the universities and the community colleges that we have here. We'll talk a little bit more about millennials in a minute, but they are reshaping society. They're more optimistic, tolerant, and multicultural than previous generations. Next slide, please. The 4th generation, this is our latest trend report, Gen Z, those who are 20 or younger. And the big question is that a lot of us have a lot of understanding of how important millennials are in the economy, but what about Gen Z, these younger people? Are they going to continue a lot of the same patterns? And the answer is mostly yes. Certainly the predisposition to being in downtown and living in urban situations is attractive for Gen Z as well. There are some key differences. I think these will have interesting impacts on Burlington. One, they're less oriented to college. So a lot of these younger kids have seen their older brothers and sisters move back home, straddled with debt, and they're not so incentivized to go to college. But they're also highly entrepreneurial. So cities need to remain entrepreneurial, very friendly to small business, and provide environments where younger people want to be and where they want to thrive. Next. So the second demographic trend that we looked at is education, talent, and jobs. Whoa, hello. Can we stay in this slide just for a moment? I know we're strapped for time. I appreciate the prodding on the slide. The third bullet on the slide is probably the most important. It just shows you why millennials are so darn important and why cities are competing for them. Today, they're 40% of the American workforce. By 2020, they could be half of the workforce. Some projections say they could be as much as 3/4 of the workforce by 2025. This is as boomers start to exit the workforce. So a lot of what follows in this presentation is how can Burlington, how can downtown in particular, be that magnet that's attractive to this younger demographic that we need for the economy. Next slide, please. The third trend, this is new, this came out of our latest trend report, and this is a huge opportunity for Burlington, rise of the mid-tier city. What's happening is a lot of younger people are moving to what are called superstar cities, the Bostons, the New Yorks, arguably a place like my hometown, Denver. And after 4 or 5 years, they're getting fatigued with the experience in these cities, the costs, the hustle and the bustle, and they're either moving back home or they're looking for smaller communities to move to. And they're attracted by a more reasonable cost of living. They're attracted by having families in communities that offer high quality of life. And also they're attractive at the opportunity to actually get involved in city building. And this is a key thing. Not only do we want younger people here, but do we have pathways for them to get involved in the city and in downtown revitalization in particular. Next slide, please. The next set of trends we look at relate to lifestyles. Next slide, please. And I will quickly go through these. Changing consumer behaviors is about retail and how retail is changing. This is critical, as you know, to downtown and certainly Church Street, which has been a retail attraction for decades. Retail's in total disruption. We know about the impact of Amazon. We know about how e-commerce is affecting retail. But the niche for cities, the niche for downtowns remains local, independent, unique concepts that can offer a different experience. Certainly Burlington has a competitive edge with downtown and with Church Street. Next. Shifts in how we get around, transportation and mobility. And the picture on the slide, that could be one of my kids, one of my millennial kids, wondering what that machine is behind him. Millennials are shifting away from cars. And in fact, today, 60% of 18-year-olds nationally have driver's licenses. That's a low. That's a 50-year low of young people actually having driver's license. So younger people, and remember that 20 to 35 age group, and also the younger ones, we're competing to bring them to Burlington. These people are looking for different ways to get around town. So whether it's bikes or it's walking or it's ride share, there are a variety of alternatives that we should think about in planning for and looking at the future of downtown in particular. Next, please. Housing and livability, also a new trend in our latest trend report. More and more downtowns like Burlington's are evolving. They're not just business centers or retail centers anymore, but they're becoming neighborhoods. So I would argue that over the next 5 to 10 years, probably the most immediate market-driven play for Burlington is more housing in downtown. And this is something that is really supported by multiple generations wanting to be down here, not just the young, but also those boomers, those people over 50, also attracted to downtown lifestyles. Next. And then the last lifestyle trend we look at is actually regionalism. When we started our trends report 10 years ago, the U.S. national debt, everyone in here accounted for about $29,000 of debt. Today, everyone in the room accounts for more than $63,000 in national debt. And what that means is that the federal government is simply broke, and that solutions to infrastructure, innovation, education, solutions are going to be local and regional, and that's really what the message is here. Those cities and those regions that invest in themselves are going to have more opportunity to be competitive moving forward. And downtown actually becomes a voice in all of that, working with the rest of the community to advance regional investment. Next slide. Last set of slides, and I'll try to stay true to that 10-ish minute guarantee. Competition next. We're not only looking at trends in the United States, we're also looking at what's going on the other side of the planet and how it affects us. This slide looks at the world's 3 largest economies over a 200-year period, and what's fascinating to me is if you go back to 1850 and if you look ahead to 2050, It's the same players. So China and India, the largest players on the planet in terms of economy. Next slide, please. So the consumption on the other side of the planet in places like China and India, it impacts our lives in Burlington. And what it means is that prices for commodities that we rely on for growth and new development, things like concrete, steel, petroleum, prices will continue to be high because of what's going on the other side of the planet. That means existing infrastructure makes sense to reinvest in existing infrastructure. So downtown business districts become a competitive advantage moving forward. Next slide, please. Ninth trend that we look at is what's next in technology. It's actually these devices that we carry in our pocket, these smartphones, that have influenced the design of buildings and cities most, interestingly, over the last 10 years. By 2020, there will be 9 billion mobile connections on the planet. That means we do a better job getting smartphone technology in people's pockets around the world than we do feeding people. The way it's influenced design is office design is more about social space, less about individual space. We're seeing that in housing design. We also see that in a downtown area. So the importance of a space like the park behind this building in terms of a community gathering space and a place that's inviting becomes more and more important over time. Next one. The last trend we've looked at, it started as sustainability when we were doing this 10 years ago. There's 3 pillars to sustainability: economic, environmental, and social equity. In these days, we're really talking more and more in cities about the notion of social equity. I know this is front and center in Burlington, and particularly with this body. And the message here is the city and the downtown, is it a place that provides opportunity for the full spectrum of the community? Are we providing opportunities not just for high-end housing, but are we providing affordable price points as well? Are we providing education opportunities for the full spectrum of folks in the community? So I sort of leave you with that thought on social equity. The last slide, which is the next slide, which doesn't have to be the last slide if you want to keep going, but conclusions. The conclusions of all this trend analysis, and again, we'll make the slides and we'll make the publication available to you. There are 250 different sources that go into our trends exercise. But the bottom line is this, is that these trends are very favorable for vibrant downtowns, for downtowns that have a sense of vitality. And we summarize this into 6 big conclusions. One, the demographics are really in the favor of downtowns and urban areas. So we're growing older, boomers, and younger, millennials and Gen Z at the same time. These generations are predisposed to being and wanting to be in downtown areas. Secondly, increasingly connected and competitive world. That gets into what's going on the other side of the globe. And if we can promote entrepreneurship, if we can partner with institutions like the university and even the hospital to create jobs in downtown, we've got a competitive advantage. Be an opportunity city. That's what that third bullet is, and really take advantage of this reverse migration from the big, expensive cities to people who are looking to resettle into smaller, more affordable cities. Global growth, making investment in existing infrastructure more attractive. Fifth, innovation and investment more reliant on regions. Are we investing as a city in a region? Are we not relying so much on the federal government moving forward? And then lastly, planning for economic and cultural diversity. So the bottom line of this whole presentation is really never in our lifetimes have all these trends converged to support areas like downtown and like downtown Burlington. And to tie this up in a tidy little bow, back to what Kelly was talking about, that relates back to our project, looking at the best model of how we manage, maintain, and market downtown Burlington, and how your existing improvement districts should best be configured moving forward. So I know that's a lot to digest.
So thank you, Mr. Siegel. So we're going to take a pause there, and
Okay.
we need to move back, and we'll bring you back up.
Okay.
If there are questions, if you have anything further, if there are questions. So we'll take a pause on that item and move back to the number 2, public forum. So I'm going to open the public forum tonight. I only have 2 people signed up. If anyone else wants to sign up, the sheets are over here. Give them to the clerk's office. They'll bring them up to me. So we'll open it up with Margaret Murray, to be followed by Stephen Marshall. And Ms. Murray, are you here? Okay, so let's switch. Steve Marshall will go first. And you have 3 minutes, and you have lights that will indicate that you're getting close. The light will come on. You have about a minute left, and the red light means you need to wrap it up. Mr. Marshall, welcome.
Thank you very much. As everyone here, I think, knows, I'm an advocate for the homeless community, and one of my battles is to reduce stigma against homeless people. Most homeless people are people who want to be members of the community in good standing. It's just that they've had bad luck and they're homeless. I personally take this very seriously and have been, for the last month or so, cleaning the Sears Lane camp because I want the community to know that the homeless community will take care of itself. I would like to ask the City Council and the Mayor to authorize city departments to help by picking up the trash. In the future, I'm hoping to recruit other homeless camps to do their cleanup. I've had a lot of receptivity to the idea. I'm willing to provide plastic bags to them so that they can. And if I could count on the city to pick up that trash, it would be a big selling point for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Ms. Murray is up next, to be followed by Karen Long. Welcome, Ms. Murray.
Oh, call me Margaret.
Margaret,
I've been
how
here
are you?
times. I've been here way too many times. Way too many times.
That's your opinion.
That's what I'm here for.
That's your opinion.
My opinion, that's right. Someone sent me the CEDO package on the housing. And I have to tell you that I'm absolutely lost in all the alphabet soups that get used. HUD is the one I'm most familiar with, of course, because that's simple. But the amount of money that the city receives from all the different sources, both at the state level and the federal level, to me has become very troubling. It is virtually impossible to find out exactly how much money is being spent on what. Now, CEDO deals with a good number of programs, but one of their primary things for money happens to be housing. And while I know there's a whole lot of people who have a lot of trouble with housing in a city that's had rents go up 35% in the last 2 decades, I also know that homeowners have had property taxes go up 39% in the same time frame. So all the rotten landlords aren't the only problem in Burlington. The main thing that concerns me, though, is every time I see all the programs that are being activated by all the nonprofits, I see a lot of stuff about tax exempt and tax credits. And the amount of money that is not being paid in taxes by people who could easily afford to pay it is very troubling. I always remember when the mall owner first came to town, he said that 42% of the cost of the mall would eventually be paid for with tax credits. I'm only now really starting to understand how that happens on a daily basis because of the amount of tax credits. I recently spoke, it was back in February, at a public hearing for a $3 million rental car turnaround at the airport. Unfortunately, I was the only person at the hearing from the public, but I just got a draft of the minutes from that meeting on May 17th. In the letter, I was advised, along with the copy of the minutes, that the city had, of course, already taken action and decided to go ahead with the project. I think a 3-month delay in minutes, maybe not criminal, but it's getting there. That's not letting the public know what's happening, and that's what's been happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. Karen Long is our final speaker in public forum tonight. Good evening, Ms. Long. Welcome.
Thank you. So I had an opportunity to meet with Brad Siegel, if that's his name, earlier, and I hope you will take more time to look through the slides more carefully, but I do not want to miss an opportunity here with a lot of changes that are going on. I think that spending $3 million on City Hall Park, I know a lot of people have spoken about it, but the fact that we are going to like wipe out what's there and start over is super wasteful. The amount of trees to go is really wasteful. And then the 22 million on the streets, when they really are going to look the same, we're going to keep parking and actually add parking on both sides of the street. Some places don't have parking on both sides. The slide showed that we are trying to get away from cars, making it more pedestrian friendly, this new age of people growing up. And I can't see why we would ever spend that kind of money on those streets and not make it more pedestrian friendly and bicycle friendly. We will have parking garages. 2 weeks ago, a DPW person spoke about that we are underutilizing our parking garages. So that's just, we need to think about that. We've invested money in them. And streets are really for moving people, not parking cars. So I really hope that that can get looked at again. I also want to echo the thing about kids moving out. My children are 31, 35, and 38, and 2 of them have moved away, one to New York City, one to Portland, Oregon. Of their friends, most of them have also moved. I would love to keep them back. I kept them in Vermont for 4 years. Each one of them went to Middlebury College, so they were around after high school, but then they fled. We have to make it nice here. And really, families, when you think about what's happening to our schools, I don't think we're investing in them. I don't know what's happened to the idea of the high school. Sounds to me like they're talking about putting in a preschool building and not dealing with the high school. So families will not stay here. I mean, it just seems like we're spending a lot of money, and to me it's really frivolous, the park, my opinion, and then just to make the streets be the same and not change, not take some opportunity and look forward and try to keep people here. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Long. That concludes tonight's public forum, so I'll close out the public forum. And we will move back to item number 4.02. So, Mr. Segal, if you'd want to come back up with BBA Director Kelly Devine. And if you have any other thoughts you want to share with us at the end of your presentation before going to questions from the council, you have the floor.
Well, I know council has got a jam-packed agenda as usual, so we do have some more thoughts on the slides, but I think at this point we would simply defer to your questions related either to the presentation or our work currently in downtown. Probably be the best use of limited time.
All right, great, thank you. Questions from the council? Councilor Busher.
So I just want to thank Kelly Devine and the group that brought you back here to look at us and then to give what I thought was insightful and useful information for me, not only as a city councilor, but as a resident. And actually, I'm still working, even though I am a baby boomer. And you described me absolutely correctly that I have to work because of the recession and all of the impacts, financial impacts. So, but it will help me in my job. Also, I think you gave enough insight into different generations to better understand and better relate to people. All of this information is out there, but for me to pluck it and bring it together as you did would have taken a tremendous amount of time. And it also, I think the mayor, if he listens to me, will understand that I did not support the downtown development for a number of reasons. I've supported some of it. I did not agree with the massing or height, but the activities within it seemed appropriate to some degree, some disappointments. And with your report, I am a little more hopeful about how there will be some positive to this structure, especially with how you discussed the needs of these small downtowns like we are. So, I want to be wrong about what I think about the downtown development, but I don't know if I will be ultimately. But this offered me some greater insight as to the value of doing it that way and development that way. So I really don't have questions for you, except that I look forward to, I did download what was in the packet, but if there's more information, I'd very much appreciate that.
There's a full trends report, and we'll make sure that that's available to you all. So there's the slides, and then a more thorough report where you could take the time and really understand how these different forces are shaping downtown. And I do think this is a lot of common information, but we have packaged it purposely to relate to cities, and so that leaders of cities can be better informed about decisions, particularly about downtown.
Right. Can I ask one other question, President?
Certainly.
So, Kelly, can you just tell me what your group plans to do with this information?
So Brad and his team is really primarily focused on looking at the current models that exist for the Business Improvement District. That's the one that helps underwrite the cost of 2-hour free parking, as well as the Church Street Marketplace. And they've been tasked specifically through a council memo to come up with a report, an assessment, and as well as look at sort of what might be next for those entities and organizations. And what might be next would cover really 2 main things. One, the scope of services they could deliver, as well as 3 proposed governance models with a preferred one. So we wanted to bring Brad before you to give you an opportunity to see this global trends information, also to introduce you to Brad and his group. And our next step will be his primary goal, which will be a recommendation delivered to the city and to the council specifically about what we should maybe consider doing next with our downtown improvement district, which is the larger one that covers the boundaries are actually South Winooski Street, Pearl, the waterfront, Main Street, and then there's a little leg that goes down Battery to where the Dinsey Knapp McAndrew offices are and Truex Collins. So he'll be coming back with a report with some recommendations for where he thinks we should take those types of organizations next and how the city could benefit from a more robust and active business improvement district for the downtown.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Busher. We got Councilor Roof, then Dean, Tracy, Paul, and Hartnett.
Thank you, President Wright. Thank you, Brad, Kelly. The presentation was insightful, and I think that it's an important conversation. I know that you've been doing a good job as well in reaching out and engaging with Burlingtonians and stakeholders for your work. There's a survey, as I understand. Could you maybe share a little bit about that survey and how it's still open in that work? Thanks.
Yes, Councilman, thank you so much for bringing that up. We've been talking to a lot of different Burlington stakeholders about priorities where people would like to see improvements in downtown. And through our 3 visits now to town, we have probably met with 150 different downtown stakeholders. But we also have a survey that is up online in a moment. Kelly is going to tell the world where that survey is. It's for anyone in the region to really tell us what their priorities are. As of today, we have a little more than 500 responses to the online survey. We would like to double that by our deadline, which is June 15th.
Yeah, so our working group on the Downtown Improvement District is the BBA, the Church Street Marketplace, CEDO, and DPW. So we've got that survey linked on websites for all of those organizations, and we have been working to push it out. Actually, just this weekend, Jillian Netton helped us get it out on Front Porch Forum and in the Neighborhood Buzz. Ron and I have been sharing it with our constituencies. We've been doing some social media push on it. But we can provide the link if any counselor wants to share it with their constituencies. We've to actually talk to Joe Spidell about UVM. We've been sharing it with downtown employers. So the main place it's located is the websites for those 4 organizations, but I'm happy to share a link. It's relatively short. We tried to keep it, I think, under 15 questions. We're hoping to get over 1,000 responses. So it'd be great to have as many voices in that survey as we possibly can. So we'll send that to council as well.
Great.
Can we maybe throw 1 or 2 web addresses out there for anyone?
So Burlington Business Association, go ahead, Adam.
I was just going to say, I can push it out on my Facebook page right now, so anyone here or at home can just go to that page and find it, but maybe the URL would be helpful.
So I think the URL is probably more complicated than just the BBA. Jillian, do you know on the CETO what, I mean? Yeah, I think it's the regular. Yeah, so the URLs are, you have to go into the page, and then I don't know the URL off the top of my head, but I can certainly get that before the end of the meeting.
Right.
It's been been on the BBA Facebook page, the BBA website, parkburlington.com, the CETO page.
All right. Thank you. Councilor Roof. Councilor Dean.
Thank you, President Wright. I have 2 quick questions. Thank you for Mr. Seal for a really fantastic presentation, insightful and in a very compact way. There was a lot there. So one short question. We're already at Generation Z. We're at the end of the alphabet. What do we do next?
You know, that's a great question. I don't, AA, I don't know.
Okay. The other more serious question is around other communities or smaller mid-tier cities that you mentioned. Are there benchmark cities in the United States that we should be looking at, either as examples of success or cautionary examples of cities that have not moved forward with initiatives like this?
I think that's a really good question. And I think overall, in a case like Burlington, where downtown is relatively healthy, where I happened to get here yesterday, so I got my 2 hours of summer yesterday, and downtown was great. I mean, people were down here, the jazz festival was in vogue, people were enjoying themselves, and on the surface, it's a wonderful, vital downtown, and for any of you who are involved in the Church Street makeover 30, 35 years ago, you were visionaries. You're visionaries on a national scale. However, all assets need to be continually maintained and marketed and polished. And to a trained eye like mine, I start looking at all the details. I start looking at the bricks. I start looking at how the grass is kept in the parks, and I start looking at the trees and all these different things. And I do think that Burlington is probably due for some polish to really help make sure that the downtown asset is as strong as it can be. So that's sort of a long intro to say that I do think there are some cautionary tales from other communities across the country that maybe grew somewhat complacent with their downtown revitalization. One that I've worked in that I'll throw out there just because it has a pedestrian mall and it may be comparable. It's also a very progressive community. But Santa Monica, California, which initially did a similar thing that you did with Church Street and in the 80s, and then up until about 2000 had fantastic results. But then they started to get complacent. The infrastructure went into disrepair, and people started to leave the downtown. Now, in about 2008, they went through a process similar to what we're doing here. They reinvented their downtown management structure, and they have since come back. But my caution is this, is if we want to be at an A grade and we're at a B grade, we're good, but we're not great. We need to be very careful that we don't slip to a C or a D, because the cost of improving from a C or a D to an A is exponentially more than going from a B to an A. And I guess, and I don't want necessarily get myself in trouble, but I would say Burlington is sort of in that B range right now. It's a good downtown. People are enjoying themselves down here, but it's showing signs of age and showing the need for some new energy and some polish to really make it that A downtown. The last thing I'll say is you are competing with every other experience. Not only cities now, but you're competing with online, and you're competing with all sorts of different things. So the competitive pressures are maybe more intense than they've been since you remade Church Street 35 years ago.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Dean. Councilor Tracy, then Councilor Paul and Hartnett.
Thank you for the presentation. Certainly appreciate it. One of the things that we're going to be hearing about a little bit later this evening is our housing action plan and talking about how we're choosing to use some of our community development block grant resources as a city. Unfortunately, those resources have continued to decline at the federal level, and subsidy for housing similarly so, such that we find ourselves in a very challenging position, much like many other communities around the country. And so what I'm wondering is if through your work you found ways to, or different models that other cities are using to address that funding issue, because that's really seemingly a huge barrier to affordable housing generation and maintenance within cities, and what specifically those models are that we might be able to look at such that we'd be able to really see a greater development of affordable housing across the spectrum, not just sort of at a certain, at one point of median income, but sort of across that economic spectrum.
Yeah, and I can follow up with you after this because there's a lot of information, a lot of cities are responding, but where I've learned most about affordable housing is in my hometown, is in Denver. Denver is now the most expensive non-coastal housing market in the United States. We're playing catch up and we waited too late. But what we have done is we're creating a number of different funding sources. Denver has created a dedicated fund locally to support affordable housing. So our city leadership has approved a mill levy increase on property tax that's devoted to affordable housing. We have created very modest linkage fees on new development to go into the pool for affordable housing. I've been involved with, this may be telling you too much, but I've been involved with an activist group in Denver that has been pushing our city actually to do more. And we're now going to double. We're going to double the dedicated fund. We initially had found $15 million a year, and now we're going to double up to 30 through general fund and through a funding source that I don't believe is tangible here. We're actually going to increase our marijuana tax by 2%, which is going to create another $8 million a year. We're going to bond the property tax to create a $105 million infusion. There are great models nationally. Land trusts, extremely effective. On a neighborhood level, accessory dwelling units are a great way. These are mother-in-law units, they're called somewhere, where you can build a unit maybe in your garage or by an alley if you've got an alley network. There's a whole variety of options, but cities, particularly in the West Coast, expensive markets like Denver, are all over this, coming up with locally based solutions because we waited too long. And perhaps Burlington can benefit from our knowledge before your market here starts to get too pricey and too inflated. So I would just end by saying there's a lot of hope for local and regional action in creating locally based sources for housing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Tracy. Councilor Paul, and then Councilor Hartnett.
Great. Thank you, President Wright. So again, thank you as well from me for being here. I did read the report. I'd love to be able to get a copy of all of the things that you have up there. It was a little too quick to absorb. Even though I had read the report, it was still a lot to absorb. And it was a group of very courageous, very small actually band of people that 30, 40 years ago who created what we have down here. They were it was I think it was pretty brave what they did. There were a lot of people who were not in favor of it, and look at what we have now. That being said, it has been a long time. All you have to do is walk down walk down Church Street, and you can see that there is disrepair. It's a precious asset, like many of our assets that we have, but it is one that I know Ron Redmond has said many times, we cannot rest on what we did 40 years ago. We have to keep on improving it. So my question is about the slide that you had about the mid-tier city and whether or not Burlington can be a mid-tier city. And there were just a couple of things that you had on there that I just didn't understand what you mean by strategies to become an 18-hour city. And then when you talk about being engaged in city building, meaning city building, what that means. And then the only other question I had was, I'm just curious to know, when it comes to the Generation Z, which are people that are under the age of 20, how do you know what they are thinking if we're talking about 8 and 9 and 10-year-olds?
Let me start with that, and I'll go up your list that you said. You know, the Gen Z psychographics is what we're extracting. We're extracting research that people who know more about this stuff than we do are doing. And this is research primarily on teenagers and those who are a little older. So how it'll pan out when they become full-fledged adults, you know, there's always a little bit of art and not so much science when you're looking at a group like that. However, there is real hard evidence on this notion that it's going to be more difficult for conventional four-year universities to recruit. And maybe one example is you can go to coding school now. You can go to computer coding school for 8 weeks, and you can come out of there and you can be eligible for $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year job. And whether it's tech or some of these newer industries, the four-year degree just doesn't have the same power as some of these others. Also, these younger people, they're growing up with technology in the crib. I mean, for boomers, for those of us over 50, computers came at work, and they were not part of leisure. You know, they're a different thing. For people under 20, they're wired essentially from day one, so that makes them extremely versatile and tech savvy and entrepreneurial moving forward. So to answer your question about Gen Z, it's really, there's art and there's science, and we're extracting psychographics from those who know best to get a good sense of what could be ahead for them. There is some guesswork. 18-hour cities. In terms of second-tier cities, if we want to appeal to people who have either moved out of Burlington or maybe they're in a large, expensive city and looking for options, they're going to move to Burlington and they're going to be seeking some of the same amenities that they enjoyed in the Boston, the New York, or the Denver, or whatever. And that doesn't mean we're going to become a place like that. But do we have a music scene? Do we have cultural amenities? Do we have entertainment options for them? So when we talk about an 18-hour city, it's instead of shutting down at 6 or 7, you know, do we stay open till 10 or 11, and do we have some of those options? Fortunately, downtown Burlington's pretty lively, and I think there are many of those options. So that 18-hour city is just a way to measure the vitality of the smaller city. And then lastly, city building. Really important, and I think this is important not only for elected officials, but for Kelly at the BBA and Ron at Church Street. Younger people, particularly the 20 to 35 age range, they really are looking for meaningful civic involvement. And you're seeing this nationally. This is nationally. There's an awakening now. Not only people 20 to 35, but now an awakening people who are younger. And meaningful avenues of involvement is not just about politics. It's about influencing where we live and making our city a better place. So are there avenues that we can get younger people involved to help make things happen downtown? For example, I did meet with the Livable Cities group today, and I asked them about a playground. Is there a downtown playground? And they said no. You know, is that a civic project that we could get a group of younger volunteers who would use a playground, you know, younger mothers and fathers, organized to help make something like that happen? Are there different volunteer activities, different special events, a variety of ways to plug people in? So the city building refers to, do we have ways to get younger people involved in civic affairs, but in a meaningful way? They just don't want to go to a committee meeting and be talked at. They want to roll up their sleeves, and they want to be involved in helping you all change your city.
Thank you. That's fascinating and very important. We could go on forever, but I'll close at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Paul. Councilor Hartnett will have the final question here.
I just kind of want to shift gears. You say you go across the country and you work with different cities and towns on their downtown and marketplaces. And are you familiar on how we are governed here in Burlington, how it all kind of works?
I have become educated. You are unique.
Right, and that's the question I'm asking. In your judgment and in your experience, given the way we do things here in Burlington, is it the best practices, and are there better practices that we could be doing to be more successful in the downtown and Church Street Market area?
Boy, your last question is a tough one. It's kind of a loaded question. So I'll
Just
give you
be
an
honest.
I'll give you an honest answer. I think you do things well here. I think they're adequate. They are not considered best practice from a national scale. And what I'm talking about is how we do the maintenance, the management, the capital reinvestment, the polishing of downtown. You are unique in having a city department manage Church Street. That's a very unique model. You are unique to have a downtown improvement district that is by charter restricted to subsidizing parking with the ability to do nothing else. So we are looking at best practices from other cities, and we're not looking at big cities. We're looking at cities your size. We're looking at college towns. We're looking at cities with pedestrian malls. We are hoping to bring back some best practices. We're also hoping to give you some options are there some ways that we can adjust our current districts to do better? Or is there an option through charter change, through voter approval, to actually look at revisiting how we do all this stuff? And we'll come back with a continuum from sort of minor adjustments on one end to really bringing this up to a 2018 business plan, not a 1982 or a 1999 business plan.
Thanks. Off the top of your head, do you know about around the country how many are kind of governed the way we are, if by any chance?
Handful.
Okay.
Handful. There are 1,000 improvement districts across the United States, and there may be a handful that are governed like Burlington.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Hartnett. So thank you, Mr. Siegel and Kelly Devine from BBA. We appreciate that great presentation. And
So we'll get the presentation as well as a copy of Brad's report to the members of council, as well as the link for the survey.
thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Applause. Right. So with that, we will move back. I apologize to the council for bouncing around on the agenda a little bit tonight. We'll move to the consent agenda and a motion from Councilor Busher.
Yes, I'd like to move to adopt the consent agenda as amended and take the actions indicated.
Consent agenda is moved by Councilor Busher, seconded by Councilor Roof. Any discussion by the City Council? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda and taking the actions indicated, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We have passed the consent agenda unanimously. And now we will move back to item number 4.01, a communication from the mayor on mayoral appointments. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, President Wright. I am excited to come forward per our charter and traditions to submit to you, the council, tonight for appointment and reappointment, a substantial list of department heads and select other positions to lead our city for the next year. At President Wright's request, I'm just going to quickly read into the record each of the appointments that we are pursuing tonight. This is also captured, of course, in the memo that I sent to you. And here are the individuals that I'm putting forward, many of whom are here with us in the room. We have Eileen Blackwood, who I'm asking to return as city attorney. In her office for assistant city attorney and assistant grand juror is Richard Hassler Jr. Kimberly Sturtevant will be the assistant city attorney and assistant grand juror. Justin St. James for assistant city attorney and city constable. Anthea Dexter Cooper for assistant city attorney and city grand juror. And Gordon Gilbert for second constable. Doreen Kraft is being appointed again to be the Burlington City Arts Executive Director. Stephen Locke as Burlington Fire Department Chief and Emergency Management Civil Defense Director. Brandon Del Pozo as the Burlington Police Department Chief. Ron Redman as the Executive Director of the Church Street Marketplace, Gene Richards, the Burlington International Airport Aviation Director, Mary Danko, Fletcher Free Library Director, Chapin Spencer, Department of Public Works Director, Norman Baldwin, City Engineer and Surveyor, Beth Anderson, Chief Administrative Officer, Cindy White, Parks, Recreation, and Waterfront Director, as well as Cemetery Commissioner, and Aaron Moreau as Harbor Master. We are also asking for a 2-year appointment for John Vickery as the City Assessor. And I've also put before you 2 interim appointments, Brian Lowe for the Chief Innovation Officer, and Neil Lunderville as the Director of the Community Economic Development Office. Susan Leonard is serving in the middle of her 2-year term. Also, because sometimes this creates confusion, I will mention that there are 2 people that are, action is not needed on tonight, but they are on the memo. Bill Ward is our Code Enforcement Director, and that is an annual appointment, but not one confirmed by the City Council. And David White is the Planning and Zoning Director, and that appointment is made every 3 years by the Planning Commission. There will be a vacancy in the general manager position, and as well as in one of the assistant city attorney positions that we'll be back to you hopefully in the months to come. But that is the list that is before you for action tonight. Maybe I could ask them all to rise for a moment and just say a couple more words about them as a group. From my perspective, this is an incredibly committed group of department heads and officials. They are hardworking, they are very talented, they are outstanding collaborators and communicators. I am very proud of this group and very grateful for their partnership in the day-to-day management of the city, and I believe the people of Burlington value them a great deal as well, and it is certainly my hope that they will earn your strong support tonight, President Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to recognize Councilor Paul for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion with pleasure to confirm the FY19 mayoral appointments.
And that is seconded by Councilor Shannon. And that can all be done in one motion, despite that some are one. That's all good to go in one motion, right? All right, perfect. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the slate of mayoral appointments as proposed, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Congratulations. And we appreciate all your good work and keeping this city running smoothly and efficiently, and also putting up with the questions that we always give you going forward. So thank you very much. That concludes the mayoral appointments item 4.02. We'll move to item 4.03, which is a presentation from Marcy Esberg, the Assistant Director of CEDO, regarding a 5-year consolidated plan for housing and community development action plan. Assistant Director Esberg, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. And I will need some assistance over getting my presentation up, but I'll get started. Or they're working on your vote.
Is someone assisting to get that going?
I'll start talking and we'll catch up.
All right.
So this evening, next slide. So just to brief those who have not heard this before, CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, was started in 1974 with the Housing and Community Development Act. Burlington is one of 1,200 communities around the country that gets a direct allocation. We are the only direct recipient in Vermont. And the main goals of the Community Development Block Grant is to provide decent, safe, and affordable housing, expand economic opportunities, and to provide for a suitable living environment. And when we go through the needs assessment, what we do is rank those in order of priority for our city, and those are the order of priority for our city based on our needs. There are 3 national objectives for CDBG, and 99.9% of the time, the objective that we fulfill here are activities that benefit low and moderate income persons. And whenever we talk about low and moderate income persons, or LMI, we're talking about people who earn 80% or less of the area median income. Next slide. So this is part of a process, and I'd like to just talk about the roles of different groups and people. CEDO would be considered the lead applicant. We're the ones who administer the Community Development Block Grant. We've formulated the 5-year consolidated plan and the action plans. And we coordinate an RFP process. We also coordinate with our subrecipients. Once we grant out the money, we deliver some CDBG projects actually in-house. There's some projects that we actually do ourselves. We report to HUD, and we report also to the mayor and obviously to City Council. As we get into the action plan in a few slides, I'm very proud to say that this is another area where Burlington is unique, that we do have a citizen advisory board that reviews all of our applications and makes the funding decisions and brings it to you for your approval. And I am affiliated with a national community development group, and I speak often on our process, and we are very unique. And when you talk about people that want to get involved and roll up their sleeves, this is just a really great opportunity for them to do so. Citizen Advisory Board, the mayor is our certifying official for our HUD programs, and he also reviews the committee's recommendations and forwards them to you. And your job is to vote or change the recommendations and send those in the form of a resolution and an action plan to HUD. When we ask for different agencies to submit programs or projects for selections, basically we do our rating on federal regulations, but also on the needs of the community. And they have to meet those goals and the national objectives, and they have to be able to actually report on the beneficiaries. So they can't just say we're doing good work. In HUD's world, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So they have to report on, I always say that CDBG and HUD funding comes with heavy strings attached to it. So what you have before you today is the consolidated plan. It has the following sections. It starts with a needs assessment, then goes on with a market analysis for housing, economic development, and also non-housing community development. Then that information is assimilated into a strategic plan and then a 1-year action plan. If you're a visual person, look at an upside down triangle. It starts off very broad, coming down to a point of the actual items of how we're going to spend the money that we get. So what I did through the plan and what I'd like to do for you tonight is really just hit on some highlights, a lot of information, 189 pages. I'm wondering who's going to say they read the whole plan. Probably none of you, but so I'm just going to highlight it. And through the needs assessment, Councilor Busher did. No, you didn't.
No, I didn't.
I was counting on you. As we go through the needs assessment, what I often did was compared it to 5 years ago, because I think it's really interesting to see our trends and to see what's going on. So as you can see, our population has gone up, the number of households has gone up, the median income has gone up. And the number of low and moderate income households has gone down. Those are all good things. we went up where we should go up, and we went down where we should go down. Some other interesting facts, if you could go back to that slide one more time. Interesting, there has been a 7% increase in the number of households at less than 50% of the median income. 50% increase in the number of large families that we have here, and that is most likely due to the number of refugee families. And a 33% increase in the number of households with at least one person over the age of 62, which just emphasizes that our population is aging. Next slide. Interesting slide. I actually put together this slide for a CETO exercise. And I said, if you just had this information at all, this the only information, but I said, based on this information, how would you allocate money? And you could see that our biggest population that has low and moderate income persons is children under 6, which is, shows that our investment into early childhood initiatives and things like that really match the need there. So, next slide. In the market analysis, well, before we get to the market analysis, we look at housing problems, and we're looking at substandard housing, overcrowded, cost burden, and severely cost burden. And those two definitions are cost burden, people spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and severely cost burden, people spending over 50% of their money on housing. And it's important to look at our ratio of renters and owners. There we have significantly, it's about 60-40 in our ratio of the number of renters to owners here. So here's some key findings under housing problems. Really, we're not looking at a big issue with substandard housing. It increased a little bit, but it's still not significant. The issue here in Burlington is cost burden, how much people spend on housing. I know it's a no duh, but it needs to be emphasized over and over again. So the amount of households that are cost burdened by 50% or more, that's increased. And the most severely cost burdened are those renters that earn the less, and those are at 30% of the area median income. They're the ones that are most severely cost burdened. Number of elderly renter and owner households have increased. Their cost burden has increased. And cost burden ratio between owners and renters is 1 to 5. So there's more cost burden among renters than there are among owners. And so in the next slide, there's a big section in the plan that talks about disproportionate housing needs. And we talked about this also when I came and brought you the assessment of fair housing, because not only do we look at cost burden, but then we also look at it are there ethnic or racial groups that are experiencing more housing cost burden than the population as a whole or the white population. And we have gone to, so those are populations that experience more than 10% of what is the average. And so in the next two slides are the different groups that do experience a disproportionate housing need and cost burden. Here, Black African American households in 30 to 50% and 50 to 80, and 80 to 100 experience, and American Indian and Alaskan 50 to 80. Next slide. In severe cost burden, again 50% or more, Asian households in every aspect of that. And then what I did was I also added, this is a slide a map that we had with the assessment of fair housing. And so you also see that you see where people of different ethnicities and races settle. So you not only see housing cost burden, but what appears to be somewhat of a segregated flow of housing of where people are settling. In the market analysis, when we start looking at housing, we're looking at how much housing costs, how old it is, and how available it is. So let's look at just a few of those things. we're looking at 62% are multifamily units and 60-40 split, and the greatest need is for those earning 30% of the median income. The average annual increase for rent in Chittenden County is 3%, and that's down from 2013. And that chart is the chart that we usually keep a record of for housing vacancy. And what you can see is that the housing vacancy in Chittenden County is getting better. 4% is the norm, and we're coming close to that. Condition of housing, our housing stock is older. That was quick, right? And so one of the things, like if you could go back to that one, our housing stock is older, and one of the things is that it's important to help low-income homeowners to make repairs, allowing them to stay and retain their housing, and also helping make homes accessible for low-income tenants and homeowners, and reducing lead hazard. So those are three things that we could be involved in spending our money. Economic development section is after the housing, and we'll go to the next slide. Burlington holds 26% of Chittenden County's workforce. We have a very educated workforce with 51% attaining a bachelor's degree, and Chapin should hold his ears, but 53% of Burlington's workers drive to work alone. So the biggest area is education and healthcare, comprising 40% share of jobs. So in the last section, we go right into the strategic plan, and what we've done in the, whoops, did we miss a couple of slides? Keep going. Go back a couple more. There should be one that says strategic plan. No? Oh, you want me to go to the last slide?
No, the next slide is the last slide.
Oh, because there should be,
For that.
there should be 4 other slides. Okay. Weird. So anyhow, so let me go through them. The strategic plan lists our goals, and what we've done was we've incorporated our goals from the assessment of fair housing and added in goals that were not in the assessment of fair housing to make it more comprehensive. And then in the action plan, we have the proposed activities, which I'm sorry that you don't have here. And I do want to mention the proposed activities, the action plan proposed activities. There are actually 2 changes that the committee did not know about until after they happened, so I wanted to bring those to your attention. And they were as a result of the latest information from HUD. So the first one under our proposed activities was the group had offered to give a grant to Resource for their Youth Build program. And we actually had a finding from HUD, and they would not allow us to fund them anymore through this activity, this manner. So we could not give them the money unless we wanted to pay the money back, which is what they were talking about. So we repurposed that money to some of the other programs, fully funding all the other programs that asked for funding, and also reserving some money for CEDO to do direct service work to low-income homeowners. And then under our public service activities, which you all know to be the most competitive, we, in both cases, we had gotten a little bit of extra money from HUD, and so we had a little over $10,000 extra there. And so what we proposed is to fund Resource as a job training program in a public service activity, which is what HUD had told us it had to be. So even though they're not getting as much money as they had hoped, they are getting some money in a that they're very grateful for. So that is the change from the committee's recommendation. We also have in there how we're going to spend home funding. We got about $500,000 in home money. And as I said, this is our timeline, and I do not expect that when we come back on June 25th, that's usually on consent. So this would be the time to really ask any questions and make any changes.
All right, thank you, Assistant Director Esberg. Questions now, and then we have the next item is a public hearing.
Right.
Councilor Shannon.
Thank you. I just wanted to note that the slides that you were missing here, we do have the
Oh,
slides.
you do? Okay, good. Thank you.
Yes. And I had a question about the home ownership versus renters. You said 60% of Burlington residents are renters, 40% are homeowners, and that the most, I don't want to say taxed because that's not the most cost burdened are the renters, which is inevitably true because, as you point out, rents go up 3% a year. We have so many families living in Burlington that are in this very unstable situation. If they could buy a home that stabilizes their rent, it stops going up 3% a year, it could possibly go down. Even their taxes are income sensitized, and it's a far more stable situation to be in. And that's something that I don't really see in our plan is an effort to increase home ownership in Burlington. And I wonder if that's something that can be considered, if it has been considered and you've decided not to do that for some reason, and if that's something that you think we should consider in the future.
So I actually brought that out from the assessment of fair housing, and that is one of the goals in the assessment of fair housing, and we have brought it into this too as a goal to increase home ownership opportunities. So we do partner with Burlington Housing Authority and Champlain Housing Trust. We don't put money to it, but we do support their home ownership programs. But I think that CEDO will also be looking at within the next year a better analysis of what can be done to increase home ownership among low-income families because the benefits are more than even income. It's their opportunity for wealth building, children who are in stable housing environments are do better in school, perform better. It's one of those benefits that is very long-lasting. So it is something that we're looking at, and it is something that we want to put into the plan.
So where you have strategies and it says support fair housing, that's the bucket in which home ownership is?
It's actually housing resources for LMI residents and homeowners. So the number 3 one would be under the strategic plan. That's where we would be looking at resources to increase home ownership.
And what do we have something doing that now?
So again, Burlington Housing Authority has a Section 8 homeownership program. Champlain Housing has a homeownership program. We've done homeownership programs in the past. We've done helping people to fund duplexes. We haven't done it recently, but I think what we want to do is have an overall strategy and look at what areas we want to increase home ownership. Also, I go back to the assessment of fair housing where we looked at by ward or census tract the number of homeowners versus renters, and there were some districts that were really out of balance. And again, it could create much more of a stable neighborhood environment to do that as well. So I think having a more comprehensive look at areas that we want to go into and how we would do that, it would be something that we'd want to look at more comprehensively.
And do you plan to do that in the coming year? Or?
Yes, it's in our work plan for this coming year.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Shannon. Councilor Busher, and then Councilor Pine.
Yes, thank you. First of all, Marcy, I want to thank you for putting this together. I think this is a tremendous amount of work, and I think you do an excellent job of the 180 some odd page and then distilling it down to a manageable kind of overview for the council and for others, and including the memo. So this is no small task, and I want to acknowledge all the work that goes into it behind the scenes. So thank you very much. The question I had has to do with your memo dated May 29th. And I wanted to, and you say the proposed allocation of CDBG home and lead hazard reduction funds is projected to, among other things, and you've got a bunch of bullets. And so one of them was provide emergency or accessible repairs to 5 low-income owner-occupied residents. What amount of, what are we talking about here? Are we talking is it under, what's that under? What category could I find that under?
That is, that would be under the same category that I just shared, the resources, housing resources to low and moderate income housing residents, and that is one of the programs we do internally at CEDO. So we actually have a project specialist that works with low-income homeowners and helps to assess their emergency needs and how we could help them. And we oftentimes leverage resources with other programs. For example, we work with Vermont Center of Independent Living, and recently we've added made accessible bathrooms in units, or an accessible driveway, or an accessible ramp, so that people could again stay housed. We're doing a lot of work in the North Avenue Co-op and plan probably in this coming year to do a whole grouping of furnace replacements there.
So that's what I wondered. I had a laundry list of things that the senior center in the community I grew up in Massachusetts offered, and I'm going to talk to the mayor when I have time. I've got a laundry list for the mayor about things that I think we should explore. So anyways, the mayor's excited, I can tell. Anyways, but the second bullet was provide screening and matching services to 100 persons who need support to age at home. Is that just through home share, or is that a combination of activities? Because there are things that
are
overlap.
grouped together. That one is not. That is just through home share.
That is just home share. And then the last thing is delivered to 700 homeless residents. It goes on who experience domestic violence, emergency. You deliver emergency shelter and case management and housing placement services, and provide 90 chronically homeless individuals with housing first support services to move into permanent housing. Is that what you hope to accomplish in 1 year?
No, it would be both of those. The first one is with Steps to End Domestic Violence, and the second one is with Pathways Vermont, and they are both are awarded a 2-year grant. So that would be a 2 years.
So this is what you hope to accomplish in 2 years.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Busher. And I'm just going to say for the mayor that I'm excited that the mayor gets to hear that laundry list. The mayor gets to hear it. Councilor Pine, and then Councilor Hartnett.
Thank you. I think obviously the work that you all do is key to holding this community together. Without a decent home and a decent job, really, we don't have much of a hope for folks to have a decent life and for kids to grow up in a strong family. And I would say that many of the things that are in here around stabilizing housing and helping people retain their housing and providing accessibility funding allow people to hold on to what they have. And I'm afraid many people have a tenuous grasp or grip on that home. And so while Councilor Shannon was asking about new homeowners, which is incredibly important, that's extremely difficult to crack that nut. But to retain the homeowners we have, I think is critical, and I really appreciate the efforts you're placing on that. As Councilor Tracy said, the resources available to cities shrink and continue to shrink, and the need grows. And so this past March, the voters made a pretty clear statement that they'd like to see more support for affordable housing through the Housing Trust Fund. So I'm hopeful that we'll be looking at something in the near future as a whole council with CEDO to really identify where to place additional resources at the highest priority levels. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Pine. Councilor Hartnett.
Thanks. Marcy, you and I have talked about a lot of these issues over the years, and it's amazing the work that we do. And I think one of the questions I had then, I still have, I mean, how do people realize that these resources are there for them? Like, how do we get the word out to the seniors that might need help with home projects, and how does that all work? And so, and I wonder if it's being utilized to its maximum, and are we really taking advantage of it? So that would be my first question there. And then I did have another question on housing, and I know affordability is the biggest obstacle. No question of affordability. But what other obstacles do we have here in Burlington that are kind of preventing us from, getting that number up there where people could be homeowners? What do you think the biggest obstacles there are besides the actual cost of housing?
Well, so you're either going to have a better job to afford a house, or the house is going to be less expensive. And so that comes to affordability one way or the other. And then the other thing that I would say is having housing that people want. And that means that it really has to be varied. And, I only heard some of the presentation, but I know that I've done some work with the Urban Land Institute. And so we live in the New North End. We have a small 850 square foot ranch house, which is fine for my husband and I. There are young people that are happy to have like a townhouse, but they want a little green behind them, so they don't want a tall story. They want like a house that, they're fine with the size, but they want to make sure they have a little yard. So I think that the best thing that we can do is make sure that we have a variety of housing to meet different needs in different locations.
Right, and then just to touch on, some of the great things that we do, and some of that we reach out to, keeping people in their homes, whether it's ramps for people in wheelchairs, or whether it's fixing their bathrooms. Can you tell us how that's kind of like, how would somebody be able to utilize those resources, like if they were in need of that? I think there's
people just call us,
They do.
and we do have a wait list.
You do?
Yes. Okay. We have a considerable wait list. So we get referrals from these different agencies, okay. And certainly from the senior centers and places like that. And we use our own, we have our website, we have our buzz, we have the ways that we communicate. So the word is out there, and for us, it's a matter of not only the finances, but the resource. We have one person to do those jobs, and they take quite a bit of time.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Hartnett. So I think we're ready to now move to the next item of the public forum. And Marcy, then this comes back to the council.
Correct, on the 25th.
25th, okay. Thank you. So with that, item 4.04 is the public hearing on the 5-year plan. So we'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to speak to the council on the 5-year plan? Hearing none, we'll close that public hearing, and we will hear back from you on the 25th. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to move to the next item, 4.05, and I'm going to pass the gavel to Councilor Mason.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Wright. Next item is item 4.05, resolution adoption of findings of fact in support of a finding of necessity re Champlain Parkway. Councilor Wright.
Thank you, Acting President Mason. So I'd like to move the resolution and wait for, after a second, ask for the floor back.
Is there a second? Councilor Pine, Councilor Wright, back to you.
Thank you, Acting President Mason. So we know this is the Champlain Parkway necessity resolution, and we We had a site examination, as we know, on May 21st, where many of us went on a bus tour, a site examination, had questions answered. The public was included. We came back here and we had a necessity public hearing. We then heard from a couple of members of the public, and we closed that public hearing out, and we directed the city to come up with findings of fact and come back to us at this meeting. So we have a number of links here that's on the city website, board docs, that have many items, but including the findings of fact. And so that's what this resolution, passage of this resolution is tonight, is a passage of those findings of fact and finding that there is necessity to move forward with the condemnation proceedings. And on a number of properties which we were not able to settle with, we did settle with many others, correct? And this will be one more, I think, significant step forward in the long-running Champlain Parkway saga that even predates Councilor Busher. You know it's been around a long time then. So Councilor Busher's not paying any attention. All right.
She's writing
So,
my laundry list.
so with that, I will, that's my comments on moving passage of this resolution.
Any other counselor wish to speak at this time? Counselor Tracy.
Thank you, Acting President Mason. Certainly appreciate it. Appreciate all the work that staff did in getting us down there to look at the different sites and the clear explanation that the different folks walked us through. I personally want to thank Kirsten Merriman Shapiro for the explanations, struggling to explain which each parcel was, because that was very, very helpful in terms of understanding what exactly we're voting on. It's a very unique thing to go through, so certainly appreciate that. One thing that helped me to gain context for was that a lot of these properties that we're seizing are needed in order to construct the shared use path that we decided that is part of the current design for the plan. And when I look at when I think about the shared use path and when I look at where that comes out, it really feels like a missed opportunity. While it's better than nothing in terms of bike pedestrian infrastructure in this particular area of the city, it's certainly not ideal. And when I say it's certainly not ideal, I mean that it's not ideal to have fast-moving bikes alongside slower-moving pedestrians moving through what are numerous curb cuts and driveways along the way throughout that path that then end up in an intersection that I think will end up being very convoluted. And so I feel that in order to take the properties in order to facilitate what we know will be an obsolete, an inadequate, and less than gold standard pedestrian and bike upgrade will be, I think, is not necessary, and I would like to see us really embrace a design that was much more in keeping with the broader plan for the city, which is to have separate facilities for different modes of transportation throughout the city, rather than building one thing, knowing that it's not going to work, and then having to go back and say, oh, well, we can fix it later on. So while there are certain properties and certain elements that are just pure upgrades, the majority of these feel like they're in order to enable a shared use path that we already recognize is inadequate and that is not necessarily up to the standards of the plan that we've set for, while the goals of creating a network, it sort of creates, I think in many ways replicates some of the patchwork effect that we have going on now. And so for those reasons, I do not think that it merits taking people's property. In addition to that, I'll note that there was also a member of the public who said that they felt that they were close to negotiation and that they just needed a little bit more. So that led me to wonder if that was the case with other properties in question here, though there was that one. So I don't feel that we shouldn't force that hand when someone is willing to come to the table and continue to talk. So for those reasons, I will not be supporting this resolution.
Thank you, Councilor Tracy. Any other? Councilor Shannon?
Thank you. My understanding is that while we are taking properties, many of the properties we're taking are temporary easements to do things like put up a fence during construction to improve safety. And while technically it's a taking, in many cases, these are not being contested by the property owners. It's more a case of the property owners failing to respond to notices and signing documents and things like that. I was hoping City Attorney Blackwood might be able to answer how many of these property owners are actively contesting the taking of the property.
I'll allow that. City Attorney Blackwood, or is there Mr. Rose? Is there someone that might be able to answer that question?
I would defer to John Rose, who is our outside counsel who's working on the project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, councilors. My name is John Rose, obviously. As I understand, none of the property owners, except for the person who spoke here, is actively contesting. None of the property owners with interests at stake in the proceeding is actively contesting the taking.
My recollection is that it was somebody from Cumberland Farms who spoke before us about that particular taking, saying that they were hoping to work something out. Is that the one you were referencing?
I'm not sure that the Cumberland Farms, you'll excuse me, I'm not the most knowledgeable person about this. I think VTrans is handling most of the negotiations with property owners, but I believe that Cumberland Farms had a concern about access to their property during construction that they were.
So, Mr. Rose, your
about.
Norm's sort of waving behind you. Mr. Baldwin might be able to answer that question.
Sorry
Mr. Baldwin.
Insert myself here, but my experience in communicating directly with Cumberland Farms, they are reasonably content with where this is going. I think there's still negotiations with the state in terms of financial compensation, but they were having concern about access to their facility to deliver fuel. And based on my comments to them, I think that at least verbally they've expressed to me comfort with where it's going. So.
Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. I was there, and I can confirm that it's an accurate recollection of the conversation that went on a week ago or 2 weeks ago. Sorry, Mr. Rose, and then I'll go back to Councilor Shannon.
So the only other property that I was talking about was the Howard Center, where its attorney came to the hearing 2 weeks ago and lodged an objection because their negotiations were still ongoing, but he was not formally contesting the.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, what did you say at the end? But what?
He didn't have a specific basis for contesting necessity. It was just to preserve his rights while they were negotiating going forward.
Okay, so there are two that are contesting this, and do they have any, I don't remember specifically what those were. Do they have anything to do with the shared use path, those two?
No, Councilor Shannon. I'm not sure I'd say that two were actively contesting the project either, at least in the sense. One just lodged an objection to necessity to preserve its rights going forward. I think the other one Norm just spoke to. But neither had to do with the shared use path as far as I know.
Okay. So really these takings are just about being unable to get signatures and putting up fences mostly, with a few that are outside of that. So whether we vote, I mean, yes or no, it doesn't really affect this shared use path issue, does it? These properties aren't being taken for a shared use path.
There are permanent takings for the shared use path, but the ones that you reference are not. Well, actually, I'll take that back. The Howard Center is got a shared use path that goes in the front face of their building, and they had expressed some concern about children crossing the shared use path to their building, and we had since offered some signage and some design improvements to make it higher degree of comfort. We've not been directly involved in those communications with VTrans and the property owner. But as Jonathan had noted, it's through all of our conversations in the necessity hearing, no one came to contest the takings that were necessary for that process. And I believe the takings already had occurred for the Howard Center, if I'm correct.
So let me just go to City Attorney Blackwood, who seems to want to
Well, I
make a
think
point.
just to clarify, there are two issues. One is there necessity to take the property, and then there's how much money people get for the condemnation. And so how much money they get is people aren't contesting the necessity for the most part, is my understanding from what we've heard from the state. But they're saying we haven't settled with you yet because you haven't offered us enough money yet.
And there are how many of those?
It still remains, was it 12 or 14?
I think it was 12 properties.
That have been actively negotiating with you about the money issue?
With the state.
The state of Vermont.
With the
not
state,
with the city.
okay.
And just to be clear, let me just interject again. We are not deciding on the money piece tonight. This is just a finding of
Correct.
necessity.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, so just so the council is clear, we're not making a decision on money, what
Right.
is...
The way the condemnation works is it's a two-step process.
Correct.
First, you all have to make a finding that there is necessity for the taking, and then when you go to take the taking, a court can, if you haven't already settled with people, a court can determine how much money you have to pay people for the taking.
Thank you.
So if we vote on the necessity, there will be another stage at which we make determinations about value.
Yeah, compensation.
Yeah, so there will be probably more negotiations. I mean, I'm not sure that the negotiations have continued, have ceased, right? They're still
Right.
going on.
Yeah. VTrans continues to negotiate the values for the properties, and will continue to do so until we set a compensation hearing for them.
So there is no dispute about the necessity. Is that fair?
We're not hearing any formal dispute other than what you heard at your necessity hearing 2 weeks ago.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Busher.
So, thank you very much. I think you just answered my question. My concern was that if we acted tonight, we would halt negotiations, but I'm hearing that's not the case. Because, and this site visit was very insightful for me, very informative. There were 3 properties that stood out for me, but the Howard Center was one that I was hoping that there could be some resolution to their concern. So the negotiations will continue, but you're telling me they're only financial and not substantive?
So let me, to direct that through me, I'm not sure, maybe the city attorney's office can answer that. I think there's some confusion about the financial piece, and maybe you could...
Sure. I think part of it is because we're not in on the negotiations with the state. It's hard for us to say exactly what they're doing, but in order to have contested necessity, they had to come to the hearing, the public hearing, and say, I contest you don't have necessity to take my property. And I don't think we heard any of that. That's, but you all were here, and that's really a little bit your decision to make. Did you hear anybody come to the hearing and say, I contest the necessity, I don't think it's necessary for you to take my property? If not, then I think what we're advising you is if you didn't hear that, then nobody was contesting necessity. That means that assuming you find necessity tonight, then you move to the second phase, which is how much money do they get? The state has been negotiating with many people already and has these properties left, and we don't know exactly what is the concern with each of those properties because we're not in on that negotiation at this point in time.
Thank you.
So,
Councilor Busher.
Acting President Mason, it's sort of clear as mud for me. I feel that I appreciate what the city attorney said, and that was very clear. But since we don't know what the state's doing, as far as what the overall extent of the negotiation is, whether it's just financial or whether it's more than that, but I'm getting advice that those negotiations will be ongoing. Even if we do this action, I'll be supporting the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Wright.
Just to be clear, thank you, President Mason. What would defeat of this resolution mean tonight?
It would mean that there is no finding of necessity, so the City Council has decided not to do the first step in the condemnation process.
Which President Mason where would that leave us?
I would ask, but my understanding is that would kill the project.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any other counselor wish to speak at this point in time? If not, there's a motion on the table to adopt the findings of necessity. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No.
Got that, Lori? Counselor Tracy opposes. Thank you. I will, turn it back to, sir.
Thank you, Councilor Mason. So that passes by a vote of
10 to 1.
9 to 1.
Thank you. Dave's not here.
Passes by a vote
Sorry,
of
I
9 to 1.
apologize. Councilor Hartnett's not here.
And thank you very much. Appreciate that. And with that, we will move to item number 4.06. And that is a presentation from Sarah Reeves, General Manager of Chittenden Solid Waste District, regarding the fiscal year 19 budget proposal. And we have you slotted in for a 10-minute presentation.
Okay, I can go fast.
Right.
I don't even need to breathe, so here we go. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. My name is Sarah Reeves. I'm the General Manager for the Chittenden Solid Waste District. And for the few who may not know what Chittenden Solid Waste District is, we are a municipality created by Act 78 to implement solid waste management mandates legislated by the state of Vermont. We function much like a school or a water district in that we are a government entity that designs regional solutions to solid waste challenges faced by our member communities. We do encompass Chittenden County, and we are the largest solid waste district in the state. We are responsible for a population of about 156,000 people and about over 6,000 businesses. We have 5 main departments: administration, finance, facilities, unregulated hazardous waste, and communication and outreach. And we either operate or manage 5 types of facilities: drop-off centers, environmental depot, the rover, the materials recovery facility, and Green Mountain compost. Now, I'm just going to do a very high-level 30,000-foot review, and then I'll come down to maybe 5,000 on 1 or 2 items. We are budgeting in our general fund revenues in the amount of $11,131,561. We are budgeting expenses in the amount of $10,597,613. And we are looking at a very heavy capital intensive year, so we are budgeting $1,755,000 in capital expenses. We are not proposing any increases to the solid waste management fee. That will stay at $27 a ton. We are not proposing any increases to the trash fees at our drop-off centers, nor are we proposing any municipal assessments or per capita fees. We are also not proposing any increases to the fees at Green Mountain Compost. We increased those fees last year, and they will remain at $52 a ton. We did just increase the tipping fee at the material recovery facility on May 1st. That went from $21 a ton to $25 a ton for our in-district members and $50 a ton for out-of-district members. We anticipate that fee going up again sometime this summer. And again, part of that is that we are significantly below the regional market average of $75 to $100 a ton. We do not anticipate getting anywhere near that high of a tipping fee. We just need to cover our costs and cover our capital expenses. The administrative fee for our biosolids program also increased this year due to, again, needing to spend more money on capital investments and as a result of the change in how we allocate our expenses across all of our budgets. And finally, we are going to begin to charge for blue bins, the 16-gallon recycling bins that we had been giving away for free forever. We are no longer able to give away for free. So we'll be charging $5 a bin. They cost us about $5.60. And really the goal is to move more folks towards carts. We think that having more capacity than 16 gallons for recycling is a good thing, so we want to encourage that behavior. So one of the things I did want to highlight are some effects happening at the MRF. As I mentioned, we're looking at a heavy capital investment year, and the bulk of that is at our materials recovery facility. We are looking to spend almost $900,000 just in that facility, one on a baler, which is the lifeblood of any material recovery facility. That will cost approximately $700,000, and we need to fix the floor, not just fix it, but repair it. That'll be another $120,000. We're also investing in our drop-off centers. We have several that need refurbishment in the very least, and a couple that need to be built, as I think this council is well aware. So we are focusing on that in fiscal 19, heading into fiscal 20. We are also embarking in a few weeks on a strategic retreat with our board and our staff about our drop-off centers to take a look at the next generation of the docks. They've served us fairly well for the past 20, 25 years, and we need to look ahead to the future and how they can best serve our population as the population has changed, where they live has changed, their consumption habits have changed, the materials we need to manage has changed, so we may need to change. So our board and our staff is looking at that in the next couple of weeks that's coming up. With that, I would love to open it up for any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Stayed within the time. Appreciate that. We'll turn it over to the council. Councilor Pine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Great presentation. I'd like to just ask if you can describe what type of capital investment will be needed to handle the compost law that's going to go into effect in the next, I think, 2 years, maybe?
Yeah, so the Act 148, which is the Universal Recycling Law, was amended this past session, and the deadline for food scrap, the ban, has not changed. So by July 1, 2020, everyone who generates food scraps will need to somehow keep them out of the landfill, and they can do that any number of ways. They can backyard compost, they can drop them off, the food scraps at one of our drop-off centers, they can bring them right to Green Mountain Compost. If you allow garbage disposals, people can put in garbage disposals. You can hire a hauler to pick up your food scraps. So that deadline has remained in place. So right now, we are in the midst of taking a hard look at Green Mountain Compost efficiency and capacity. We think that we are currently at capacity. We are actually taking in about, we will probably end up at about 5,800 tons of food scraps this year. So that's pretty much what we feel we can manage and not have odor issues. So we're thinking we may need to figure out a way to accept about 10,000 tons. So we are right now, again, like I said, embarking on a focused review of that site and what that site will need to look like in 2 years. So the board has charged us with saying, with the question being, what will it take, money-wise, capital investment, to ensure that we can manage that amount of food scraps. So that's where we are now. So we're going to be giving our board a preliminary report probably this month, towards the end of the month, with some initial findings, and then we will continue throughout the summer to refine those findings so that by budget time for fiscal 20, we know exactly what we need as far as construction. So to answer your question about capital investments this year, very few in Green Mountain Compost. We had heavy years the past 2 years, and we are, I've asked my crew to take a breather and to only use what you have. Nothing's on the wish list. There is no wish list this year. And then to gear up for fiscal 20, where we most likely will be making some changes to how we operate. So this year it's a very light capital investment, about $30,000, $35,000.
Thank you, Councilor Pine. Councilor Mason. And then Busher.
Thank you, President Wright. Ms. Reeves, I've been reading, sort of we all have in the national news, about sort of the changing economics of recycling with China and sort of no longer taking what it's termed our garbage. I'm wondering, how that's, you're reading in a number of larger, municipalities, their recycling's going into, landfills instead of, so I'm curious if that's had, that sort of decision is impacting us here, and even your budget, which may not be relevant at this point. So
it actually is very relevant. It's a very good question, and you're right. It's not a problem that is only in Vermont. It is around the world. Right. And I think it's interesting when I give presentations and talks that people don't necessarily realize just how globally connected Vermont is, particularly in the recycling world. We are fortunate in that the only waste stream or recycling stream that has been affected has been mixed paper. The rest of the materials that we sort at our material recovery facility are sold domestically, whether here in the U.S. or in Canada. So we're very fortunate in that regard. The mixed paper, unfortunately, for us is 37% of what we process at the MRF. So that necessitated another hard look at our infrastructure, which it was planned, it just wasn't planned for right now. I was planning to take that hard look at the MRF maybe in 2 years, but we're doing it now. And what that means is taking a look at that particular material stream and trying to tease out the better high quality material, which is essentially office grade paper. That still has excellent value. So we want to be able to see if we can pull that material out. It will still leave us with essentially a junk mail, but less of it. And the high quality on the paper, on the ledger paper, can buffer the losses on the mixed paper, and we can wait that out. That doesn't solve the problem of what to do with the mixed paper. The real solution is waste reduction. We need to stop producing and throwing out as much as we do of the mixed paper. Are we going to be able to solve that problem 100%? No, we're not. One of the things that we can do as consumers is to opt out of as many things that are coming into our mailboxes and our post office boxes that we don't want as possible. Some of it's not possible, but we need to try to do as much as we can. Where you can get things online, get them online. If you don't need that catalog, please don't take that catalog. So what we're doing is, again, looking at the infrastructure, looking at our sorting capabilities, looking at what that cost will be, and wrapping that into, again, a strategic conversation about infrastructure with the district. So we started with GMC, with Green Mountain Compost. We are looking now at the drop-off centers, and next will be the MRF. So those three big components will look very different within the next 4 years, I guarantee. So the paper, we were receiving $75 a ton for it last year. We're now paying about $57 a ton to move it. It is still being moved to secondary markets. China has really drastically changed their acceptance rate to where it's essentially a ban on a lot of products. They have also, between May 3rd and June 3rd, so just yesterday, stopped taking anything, any of our recycling at all. So there was a complete ban on any imports. We had been moving material to Vietnam and to Korea. Vietnam has now closed the doors for about the next 4 months. They're going to come back in the fall. There's capability in India, not as much. There's some in Indonesia. So we're looking at secondary markets, but they will probably fill. Some programs, particularly on the West Coast, are landfilling recycling. They are shutting down their programs. They relied on China much more heavily for all of their products. We did get into the law this year, into actually the Clean Water Bill, the ability for the Secretary of A&R to waive the landfill disposal ban on paper if necessary. We asked for that as a relief valve should we need it. We are hoping to not need it. We continue to work with our broker to move material, but if it's going to cost us $150 to move material to a broker and it's $120 to put it in Coventry, I have to make that choice to move it to Coventry. So we have that ability. I hope to never have to use it.
Thank you for the thorough but sobering response.
Thank you, Councilor Mason. Councilor Busher, and then I think we're ready for a motion.
So, Mike, I have a couple of comments, but a question. Did the Board of Commissioners unanimously support your budget?
Yes, they did.
Okay, so our representative said yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's important to me. I always ask for
Yes.
that. I think that Burlington has some work to do regarding composting, because backyard composting, if not done correctly, brings animals. And so I think the Board of Health may need to get an early start on some legislation about how to deal with this, how to do it right. And I think we as a city need to be smart about it. So I'm a gardener, and I go to Gardener Supply and take classes. I thought I'd do my own composting. Not so much, because of how to break it down and really make it useful. So anyways, just FYI. I wanted to know about compost bins, the little ones. Do you charge for those, or are those still free?
The little kitchen side ones, I believe we're going to start charging for those as well.
I believe so, not the black ones, but we're discontinuing the black ones. So
Right.
the green ones, I think we do charge for.
I'm sorry.
Right, so we had two different versions of the kitchen compost
You
pails.
have the little sink ones, and then you have the bigger ones. I have the
Right.
bigger ones. But
Yeah.
you will be charging for those also?
I believe we are. I don't know if it's going to be $2 or $5, but it's a nominal charge.
Okay, okay. I know a dissatisfier, and because it's not mandated that you keep your compost out of the garbage, is that when you started charging people who just went to your drop-off centers for composting, people are now, I mean, the people I talk to are not bothering doing that anymore and putting it in their garbage, which really bothers me. And I spoke against that last year, so I'm just letting you know. I still think it's, in the world of what we're trying to accomplish, I don't know how much money that generates for you, but I would prefer that that not happen, because I want to encourage people to separate their compost from trash. So that's just my sense on the budget, and I see it's still there. So there was one other thing. You talked about upgrading the drop-off centers. So the one in Burlington that's on Pine Street, has that got a future, and is that going to be upgraded? Because I don't even dare go there. I feel I'm going to lose my car there. It's awful to avoid. Well, I don't know if any of you have gone there, but I mean, it's hard to avoid the dips and the, oh my goodness. So is that got a future for?
Not at that location, no.
Not at
So
that
we have a memorandum of understanding with the city. We're in year 2 of that 3-year MOU, and we have land on Flint Avenue, and that is where we intend to build the new drop-off center for Burlington when we are able to.
When this road is done.
Correct.
Okay, incentive to get the road done. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you,
All right.
thank you, Councilor Busher. Thank you. We now have, I was very wrong, we are not ready for motion. We have Councilor Dean, Shannon, and Pine.
Thank you, President Wright. Just a quick question regarding what we're seeing as the possibility of actually having to landfill mixed paper. Is there any possibility that that could serve, this mixed-use paper could serve as an energy source for McNeil rather than ending up in a landfill?
That's a good question. I would have to talk with them about their specifications as far as what they want as feedstock. Obviously, we do still have the leaf drop area there, and I know that they want a consistent inbound, which every biomass incinerator or waste energy facility wants to be a very consistent material coming in. But it's a good question, and if so, what condition would they want it in? They would certainly want it dry. They can't have any additional moisture. Would they need it shredded? Would they? So it's a good question to ask, and I can pose it to them.
Thank you, Councilor Dean. Councilor Shannon, then Pine.
Thank you. Very substantial part of the budget increase is this new baler, and I wondered if you could speak a little bit about what that, is it replacing something? Does it give you new capacity? What does that do for us?
Yeah, so the baler is, it's a very, very large machine, and it's at the end of the process at the material recovery facility. So after everything is sorted out, we'll sort into 7 or 8 different materials. They go into a holding area called a bunker, and when we have enough in that bunker, it's released into the baler, and they make cubes. So that baler essentially is making a nice compacted cube that goes onto a truck, and then that goes onto market. We are contractually required to replace certain capital equipment on a regular basis on a schedule. That contracted with our vendor who operates it, the MRF. So we own the building, we own the land, we have to buy the equipment, and then the vendor operates that for us. So we have to replace a variety, all of the equipment on a regular basis. This baler has, I want to say at least 18, I'm getting the hours wrong. I don't want to make a mistake here, but it has many, many more hours than it should. They have maintained it very well for a very long time, and it is now to the point where it is not generating enough compaction power to get the density that we need on the bales, and that's dangerous. So
What you don't want to have is to have your bales explode in a truck or on a floor in front of someone and have cause a problem.
So it's just replacement of existing capacity and
Correct.
just needs to be done.
It needs to be done, and unfortunately. We have delayed it, I think, for 2 years now, as have we delayed the floor. So looking at things, can we defer certain capital expenses? This was one that we thought that we could. We wanted to make sure we had enough money in our capital reserve fund for the MRF to be able to pay cash. We don't want to take a loan, and we do now.
Thank you.
Now's the time, unfortunately.
And then just to follow up on Councilor Mason's question, when you're talking about the overseas market, is that market for recycled materials or raw materials to recycle?
I'm not quite sure if I understand the question. So the material that is going overseas is literally that bale of mixed paper. So that will go to a mill, and then that mill will pulp it. And then they will make new paper, new boxes, new box board, tissue paper, all kinds of things.
So it's baled raw material to be
Essentially.
recycled overseas.
To be made into
and that's
something
what-
new. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Shannon. And then Councilor Pine, I think we should be ready for motion after that. We do have, it's an important topic, but we have an executive session left to go. So, Councilor Pine.
Sure, thank you. The idea of taking recycling and taking it to the landfill just deeply disturbs me.
Me too.
I was a senior at UVM when I was appointed to the recycling task force, and we came up with this thing called the blue bin system in 1985. So it goes back quite a ways for me. The idea would be to take a look at what it would take for the waste district to set aside a reserve fund or a sinking fund or some way to make that so it's not just driven by the price all the time. I mean, I know we need to be cost effective, but this is just our only planet. So I think we have to kind of keep that in mind as well. I hope.
Absolutely. And landfilling the paper is the absolute last resort. And it is, and again, we don't need to make a profit. We're not a profit-driven entity. We just need to cover those costs. We do have the ability to subsidize those costs. So, that's something that we did look at. We did, before we raised the tip fee in May, we had been subsidizing the losses out of the operating reserves. So we didn't want to do that anymore because we knew we had these pretty major expenses that we needed to cover in the very near term, and we didn't want to leave ourselves too short to be in case of an emergency. But what came from those conversations was exactly what you said, was we need to also have an operating reserve. So that is something that did come out of those conversations. We will be establishing over the next year to help to buffer and, that idea so we can not landfill. We also don't want to have to be fluctuating the tipping fee too irregularly. We want to maintain as steady a fee as we can for as long as we can. We are not a private entity. The private MRF down in Rutland is raising their fee every month. Not lowering their fee every month, raising their fee every month. We don't want to do that to our member communities. We want to maintain a nice steady fee. So that is the hope, to set up that operating reserve fund and look for every other option other than landfilling. It is the absolute last resort.
Great, thanks. And since we have a former city manager here, I want to see if Deke had anything she'd tell us as elected officials. Is there something that we should be watching out for here with the waste district at all? Or?
No, actually, I think thank you for that. My boss is here. No, I think the finances are in awesome shape. The fact that we can just go out and buy a $700,000 baler because we've been paying attention to that for so long is indication that we've been planning. And we will continue to. So the difference between the revenue and the expenses that you see is going into the capital reserve fund so we can stay on top of that, because when we take, if we were to incur debt, you incur debt. That's how it works, and we'd like to avoid all of that by simply planning ahead. So we'll be, part of my job will be to extensively plan ahead and make sure we're putting enough money aside to avoid debt to whatever degree we can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Pine, and thank you for that presentation. And we'll now look for a motion to on the Chittenden Solid Waste Fiscal Year 19 budget. Councilor Busher.
Yes, I'm going to move to approve the Chittenden Solid Waste District FY19 proposed budget.
Seconded by Councilor Dean. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for that presentation. We appreciate that. And with that, we will move on to item number 5, which is committee reports.
Excuse me. You have
Excuse me.
point
Excuse
of
me,
order?
Councilor Busher. I'm going to recognize Councilor Busher now for a point of information or point of order.
4.07 was an executive session. Are you going to do the other things before that?
We are going to the executive session when we're done with all these items.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are moving ahead to committee reports. Any committee chair who would like to? Councilor Paul.
Thank you, President Wright. This came up in between the last meeting, so I apologize for the last-minute notice. There is going to be an HR committee meeting tomorrow night at 6 p.m. to discuss step policy revisions. So again, my apologies for the last-minute notice.
Thank you, Councilor Paul. Any other committee chair? Councilor Roof and then Councilor Dean.
I have two. Public Safety Committee will be meeting tomorrow here at City Hall at 5:30 in room 12. We'll be discussing several items related to the homelessness initiative that's been going on in that committee. Also on behalf of Councilor Nodell, who is in Finland, she asked me to share that the Inclusionary Zoning Working Group will be meeting next Monday here in Contois. That's June 11th from 5:30 to 7 for a public hearing. Thank you.
Before I go to Councilor Dean, I'm going to go back to Councilor Paul to give us a little more.
Thank you, President Wright. I forgot to mention the meeting tomorrow night at 6 p.m. is in the the Human Resources Conference Room. That's at 200 Church Street on the first floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Paul, for that informational update. Councilor Dean.
So just a reminder that the License and Local Control Subcommittee will be meeting tomorrow afternoon, June 5th at 4:45.
Thank you, Councilor Dean. Councilor Mason.
Thank you, President Wright. The boards and commission will be holding its first meeting, I think, with an expectation of 5 o'clock, June 11th in room 12. The following evening, the Ordinance Committee will be meeting at 5:30, also room 12, to continue its discussion of proposed amendments to the suspension and revocation of certificate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mason. Councilor Shannon.
The Charter Change Committee will be meeting on Wednesday, the 13th at 7 o'clock in Conference Room 12, and we will be discussing the capital improvements on Church Street, how they're allocated, as well as the numerous issues that were discussed at our council retreat in terms of council interactions, we'll say. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Shannon. Councilor Pine.
The Community Development and Neighborhood Revitalization Committee will meet this Thursday, the 7th, 5:30, conference room 12. On the agenda is a presentation on the consolidated plan that Marcy presented tonight. We'll also have a update on the early learning initiative.
Thank you, Councilor Pine. Other chairs? Seeing none, we'll conclude item number 5. Item number 6 is city councilors on general city affairs. Any councilor on general city affairs? Councilor Dean.
Thank you, President Wright. I'm conscious of the late hour, but I just wanted to call everyone's attention to the report that's coming back to the City Council regarding our natural lands and connected initiative that initiated here with a resolution about a year ago. I want to call particular attention to a new name for our initiative, which is called Burlington Wildways, which is a little bit easier to pronounce, and also call everyone's attention to a slate of items that we have planned for the year ahead, 2018-2019, and our intent to come back to the City Council for a little bit of additional financial assistance in moving those initiatives forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Dean. Other councilors on general city affairs? Hearing none, we will conclude item number 6. Item number 7 is City Council President updates. Just a couple quick things. The Ad Hoc Committee on City Hall Park and Trees meets Wednesday, June 6th at 7 o'clock in room 12, and we will hope to conclude our work of that ad hoc committee Wednesday evening if possible. So that's this Wednesday at 7 in room 12. Lastly, just a friendly reminder on a couple of fronts. One is on deadlines, and the first one is the city council is doing a pretty good job on deadlines, and we just need to, and I think generally everybody is, but we just need to make sure that whether it's executive session, and I know things happen, but that it's important for the city clerk's office, it's important to move things forward in the most efficient way possible, that we maintain those deadlines. So especially if hopefully when there's time-sensitive actions, we can get those in a timely fashion. And also just a friendly reminder, councilors, please let me know if you are not going to be able to attend or will be more than a few minutes late to meetings. With that, I will conclude, and Mr. Mayor, we'll move on to item number 8. Mr. Mayor, on general city affairs.
Thanks, President Wright. I'll try to be brief. Just first of all, Jazz Fest is underway. It runs through this Sunday, and I hope everyone will have an opportunity to get out and enjoy this year's festival. It's a 35th year in which the Discovery Jazz Festival has been happening here in Burlington, and I think this year's lineup is as good as it has ever been, and it's really not to be missed. The Community Sailing Center had its grand opening this past Friday and Saturday. If you have not had an opportunity to get down and see the new facility yet, I encourage you to do so. It is truly one of the finest facilities of its type in the country, and to me it's just really exciting to think what this organization that has worked out of makeshift spaces on the waterfront for more than 20 years, what it will now be able to do in this state-of-the-art facility. Already, this organization manages to touch just about every child that goes through the public school system in profound ways and inspire an understanding of the lake. This new facility will, I'm sure, allow them to do even more. And congratulations to everyone involved in the many-year effort to reach this milestone. Another exciting event that took place, two other exciting events that took place this past Saturday at almost exactly the same time, actually. There was the opening ceremonies for the Special Olympics Summer Games that took place up on the UVM campus, and it was really quite a remarkable event that brings together really an incredibly well-organized effort from across the state, and a demonstration of sportsmanship, breaking down stereotypes about the mental disabilities that the athletes in that event experience. And really this Special Olympics effort has become a international movement for inclusion, and this opening ceremony is really a remarkable event to behold. And again, I encourage anyone, this is becoming an annual event here in Burlington, and look for future opportunities to participate in that. And also on Saturday night was the Silver Jubilee anniversary for the Tibetan American community here in Burlington. Burlington is one of about approximately 30 communities in America where Tibetan Americans have settled in substantial numbers. The first of those communities to form, as I understand it, a local association was here in Burlington, and this was the 25th anniversary of that milestone. It involved a representative from His Holiness the Dalai Lama coming up from D.C. to mark the ceremony. Senator Leahy, who has had a long interaction with the Dalai Lama, spoke at length, and it was really quite a special event, and it was a reminder of the close connection that municipal government has had with the Tibetan American community throughout that time. We have a significant number of outstanding public employees working for the city that participated in that event. Last item I wanted to note looking ahead is an event that will take place here next Wednesday on June 13th at 3 p.m. This is our first annual City Hall blood drive, something Katie Vane from the Mayor's office has really taken a leadership role in organizing, and Sorry, it is from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. It ends at 3 p.m., so don't show up at 3 p.m. It's the first time we've organized it in this way, and we're hoping that there will be strong participation in the public, and certainly city officials are invited to attend and be part of that. Thank you, President Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Councilor Busher, thank you for reminding me that the recessed executive session was 4.7. I think what I really should have said was, if there's no objection from the council, I'm going to move forward with the agenda items and come back to this. I wanted to complete the agenda items that we had here. So with that, City Attorney Blackwood, I can just now reconvene the executive session. What's the?
Yes.
Okay. So we will, do we need to adjourn the regular city council meeting first?
No, you'll adjourn at the end of the executive
Okay.
session.
And do we have any action coming out of the executive session? No, right?
No.
We do not. Okay. So unless Channel 17 needs to come back for adjournment. Okay. All right. So with that, we will go back into the recessed executive session.
You're done.
adjournment.
Are you on? All right, we are back from executive session, and I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Councilor Roof, seconded by Councilor Jang. All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.